Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Produce Buzzers podcast. We are so happy you have joined us today, and I think you will be too after the show is over, because you will learn a lot about fresh fruits and vegetables, how to select and store them, how to prepare and cook them, and surprising facts about their history and origin. We hope it inspires you to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, not only for your health, but also for your delight and pleasure as you explore their amazing world of taste and delicious flavors. Eating more of them will transform your life in so many positive ways. So settle back, relax, and get ready for another delicious adventure with the Produce Buzzers. Greetings and welcome to another delicious episode of the Produce Buzzers podcast. I'm Edwin Stepp, your host and executive editor of ProduceBuzz.com. I'm joined once again by Teresa Nolan, the founder and the president of Produce Buzz, along with Rick Stepp and Cynthia Benedetto, both contributing editors to Produce Buzz. Now, Produce Buzzers podcast fans, you know that we focus on fresh fruits and veggies in our quest to encourage people to eat healthier. But once in a while, we come across a product that is outside the boundaries of fresh produce that deserves special attention in that same mission of healthy eating. Today's episode features one of those products. It is a product that is normally considered junk food by nutritionists, but it is undergoing a radical change thanks to our guests on this week's podcast. Today, we have two very special guests who are redefining snack food. But this is more than a story of a successful startup and exciting new food products. This husband and wife team turned a deeply personal tragedy into a mission to help others eat healthier. In doing so, they created a company that is disrupting the snack food and fresh produce aisles to offer delicious products that are also good for you. When Megan and Scott Reamer's son Jackson was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder, they began researching anti-inflammatory diets to help ease Jackson's struggle with the disease. They quickly became aware of the central foods needed in a healthy diet and focused on those foods that were commonly known to help reduce inflammation and reduce chronic disease. But they began to miss some of those snack foods they enjoyed so much before that quest. Foods that are usually prohibited in those recommended diets, such as potato chips. That led them to experiment with making their own at home. Could a potato chip actually be good for you? They were about to answer that question with a resounding yes. So in 2013, from a humble beginning in their family's kitchen, they launched Jackson's Chips and began offering their new snack food to the public. From the kitchen to local farmers markets to local grocery stores, the Reamers were building a loyal following of customers who literally ate it up. Then they secured a fortuitous appearance on the TV show Shark Tank, which infused their company with the resources needed to take their tasty chips to a heightened, completely new level, to national distribution. The company continues to grow and expand, and you can find their chips almost everywhere now. Megan told the panelists on Shark Tank that what they have done is equivalent to turning lemons into lemonade. But I think it's much more than that. It is definitely much more than that. It's a tale of innovation, perseverance, and mostly love. Jackson Chips wants to be more than a snack company. They hope to make life better for people through good food and kind actions. With that in mind, they are using their success to give back, especially to support groups who help children suffering from rare diseases. So tune in for this heart-rending but also heartwarming story. Megan and Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Wow, thanks for having us. That is quite the intro. I'm really honored. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Really.
Yeah. Well, it's well deserved. I'm really motivated and inspired by your story. It's really, really good. But I gave a little bit of background, but let's dig deeper into the family story. Start wherever you want, but I was assuming that you don't come out of the food industry. This seems like it was born in the kitchen. But tell us more about your family and.
So you are right in that assumption. We are not food people. We just had this very specific need in our home, and had to make foods all across the board, not just snack foods, but all the different types of foods that accommodated that diet. It was a pretty restrictive diet for our son. So he had this rare autoimmune disease and it was undiagnosed for many years. So it was
Wow.
undiagnosed for 12 years. And he lost his ability to walk and talk during that time that we were looking for a diagnosis. And so, for us to sort of pivot to his diet and try to understand some of his symptoms, some of alleviating or at least not aggravating his symptoms through his diet, like those are really the only tools we had in trying to adjust what his daily life looked like. And so
Yeah.
that's where we went.
Let me
He
ask,
eventually got
so
this diagnosis.
when did you, how old was he when you first found that he was having these problems? It was not diagnosed.
Yeah, so he was like around 2.5 years old when he started to show some symptoms. And
Yeah.
then he finally got a diagnosis when he was 14.
Wow. Took 12
Hmm.
years
And
before.
it took about a year to 18 months before those symptoms sort of manifested in the totality of his loss of fine and gross motor skills. So it looked a little bit like MS or Lou Gehrig's disease, where he sort of slowly lost those capabilities. And
Yeah.
so it was obviously heart-wrenching to watch. And of
Right.
course, needless to say, we're going to tons of doctors and children's hospitals and saying, "Hey, something's going on here. What is it?"
Yeah.
And to a man and a woman, everyone said, "We have no idea." The only clue we had was that we had some high confidence that there was an underlying inflammatory sort of biology or an inflammatory issue happening in his body, the genesis of which we had no idea. But that's the only thing we knew. As Megan mentioned, the only thing we could do, the only thing we could possibly affect, since no medicines were available, we just said, well, let's see if we can address this at some level, ameliorate some of his worst symptoms through food.
Yeah. Wow.
It
Really.
was a process, like the medical part of that, and trying to just continue to research, who should we take him to? What are there advances that are happening? Is there different testing that's happening? Should we go to this specialist? And adjacent to that has always been this diet part of it, right? Because what we saw when we did start to play around with his diet was that, certain things definitely helped some of the negative symptoms he had. So he had a lot of gastrointestinal issues and discomfort and wasn't gaining weight. He had a lot of sleep issues. The GI issues were tied to his neurological issues. So if the GI was, if his stomach was upset or he was in some pain, that was affecting him neurologically. And so, when we were playing around with the diet, we could see if we moved the needle here, it made some changes here, right? So that was really this very primary space for us and
Yeah.
place to see change.
Yeah.
And so that was where Jackson's really originated the brand and the company and the products, because like I said, we were making all of these things from scratch, and they were things like kombucha and sauerkraut, fermented foods,
Yeah.
broths, all of the things that are really convenient now to buy.
Right.
But these chips were one of those things that we made because we were looking for, specifically this root vegetable and trying to avoid some nightshades and white potatoes, and then, certainly a specific oil. And so, when we decided like maybe we should launch a potato chip company, like maybe we should do something and share Jackson's story this way, that felt really right to us, like sharing his story in this positive way and maybe resonating with other people who were going through some version of this. Uh, but we definitely grossly underestimated how hard the food business is, and we, sort of walked through the aisles and said like, gosh, there's just so many potato chips or snacks on the aisle, like on the shelves, it can't be that hard. And we all know that it is really hard, and we were very naive about what that was going to be and what the process was going to be.
Yeah, the grocery industry is not what a lot of people think. I often liken it to the grocery stores are really just renting their shelves out to you for the most part with the
Well, it
slotting
starts to
fees and
feel
all that.
that way, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
the
Yes.
slotting fees and all of that. But that is again a real tribute to you to break into that and to get the distribution that you've got. What was the name of the disease? It was finally diagnosed. They know what it is now, right? So
Mhm. Yeah, it's called Aicardi-Gutierrez syndrome, and it's named after the two French doctors who really did the research and discovered it. And then it's short, it's called AGS, like Alpha George
Okay.
Sam.
Right.
And we continue to be part of that community to try to raise awareness through things like this, as well as on Shark Tank when we were on Shark Tank, and continue to try to raise money to direct toward research,
Oh,
to try
wow.
to find a cure and treatment for it. So
Yeah.
our
So
hearts are still very much there.
these doctors discovered it after you were aware your son had it. Is that correct? Or are they?
They knew that there were different mutations and versions,
Okay.
and our son never lined up with what those mutations were. And so basically the testing finally caught up with him, and we were able to link those two things together. But that took quite a long time. And then once he was diagnosed, he was 15 years old when he was diagnosed. And then, very quickly, he was part of an experimental drug trial. And then he was on that for about 15 months. And that's ultimately what he ended up passing away from
Oh,
was the drug trial, because we increased his dosage and it was too much. And so he passed away within a few weeks of increasing that dosage
wow.
in 2017, August of 2017.
Yeah.
So Jackson now continues to be his legacy, and
Yeah.
what we all
Yeah. He made a sacrifice to further the research. So yeah.
pretty much, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. And
Right.
we were able to do some testing afterward through his autopsy and through some tissue donation that really allowed researchers and physicians and specialists to understand this disease in a more comprehensive way. And I think that was some comfort for our family, having gone through all of this journey with him, and to think that we were able to help some other people and other children specifically who have this disease, to try to at least further the understanding and progress around
Yeah.
treatment and a possible cure.
That's
Right.
why we're so passionate about the bringing awareness to this disease, as well as more generally orphan and rare diseases, is that our experience was that it's extraordinarily challenging and lonely to be a family where a child suffers from one of these rare diseases. He was the seventh to be diagnosed with AGS version 7, and so there are just not many people to commiserate with or say, "Gosh, what do you do to help this?" And so that the community is so small, and the research is so ill-funded, simply because the return on that funding won't be very large because it's only going to help 20, 30, 50, 100 people, whereas cancer
Wow.
affects tens of millions, hundreds of millions across the globe, right? So the awareness element is part of the reason we started the company. Not just because we reverse engineered a diet based on ancestral fats and fantastic root vegetables, but also because the from a social standpoint, bringing awareness to rare and orphan diseases is a good unto itself, and an
Yeah.
important thing for a society as advanced as ours is to consider resourcing.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. That's so you've got a broader umbrella, a bigger umbrella to do your work and contribute. So that's hats off to you there. I want to know a little bit about Jackson, since he's the kind of the face of this product and the company. What can you tell us about him? What was his personality like? He must have been really have a great personality.
I've got to start. Let me start, Megan.
Yeah, go ahead.
He was the
But thank
tough.
you for asking that,
Yes.
Edwin. I appreciate that, really. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. No one has ever asked us that in any podcast or interview
Oh,
before. Thank you very much from the bottom of my
well,
heart
I
for.
have children, and when I teared up when I read your story, thinking about my children. What would it be like?
Yeah.
So, and I think
Yeah.
about anyway.
Let me give you an anecdote. Jackson, it's not an exaggeration to say that he spent 12 years more or less in and out of hospitals and having, many hundreds and hundreds of procedures done to him in our effort to find the genesis of this pathophysiology, right? And so this disease. And so I can tell you that he was the strongest person I have ever met in my life. And so, I'm going to cry about it, but that, he went through all of that stuff, smiling the entire time. And and many of these procedures are uncomfortable or downright painful. Jackson had to have both of his femurs broken to replace the hips into the hip socket, and was in a full body cast for I think 4.5 months. That the doctors told us that that is not a procedure they would do on anyone that's, basically 10 years old or older, because the pain and discomfort would be impossible for any adult to bear. And yet, that was just one of many dozens of similarly uncomfortable and painful procedures that he went through in order to deal with the ramifications of this disease, which we didn't even know the name of for 12 years. So I'll just say that he was the strongest, most resilient human being I have ever met.
Makes
And,
sense.
and the follow-up to that is we decided to like throw our hat in the ring and start the business that same summer that he had that surgery. So
Oh,
so he's in this body cast, and he was the oldest of our four kids. So we have three younger children, and you know, we're carrying him literally sort of like this, like almost flat everywhere we went. And thought, okay, this is a good time to start this chip business and start making them ourselves, and set this whole thing up. Why not? Like we
oh,
have nothing else going on.
oh, brave people. I would have not had the way I'd have the energy or to do
The
that.
naivete, I think that speaks to.
Okay.
But it was funny because I would agree with Scott. He was just this blessing for us in so many different ways. And we miss him terribly. And so I think, the bright spot about him and who he was and what the mark he made on our lives is now something that we get to share with other people. And so, even just being able to continue to say his name as frequently as we do, and share his story in, years after he has passed away, is we're grateful for these opportunities. And so that feels really comforting for us still, that he's very much still part of what we're doing.
Yeah.
So
Did he
so we're happy
lose? Did
about
he
that.
lose? I assume that his mentally there was no decline.
Right. No,
What about
cognitively he was fine.
speech? Speech?
Speech was affected because like his fine motor skills were affected. So he spoke almost like someone who has had a stroke, where it's very slurred or delayed, like he couldn't sort of manipulate his tongue in the right way and move his jaw around and stuff. So he was very communicative with his eyes, and that was where he used a lot of eye gaze. He had really, really beautiful blue eyes, and these very long eyelashes, and so they were very expressive, and you could tell a lot and know what he
Yeah.
was wanting and thinking, and if he was happy or not, by just a lot of that gaze.
I mean,
Yeah.
looking up was yes, looking down was no. I mean, it was a remarkably complex language, effectively, through his eyes to us and his brother and sisters.
Yeah. And he must have been like any other kid. He had to have a lot of things he enjoyed to read
Yes.
or watch, or I don't know if he was able to play video games with the motor skills thing, but what kind
He
of,
liked watching them, that's
yeah.
for sure. And he loved
Love,
Harry Potter, and
yeah.
he definitely had very clear likes and dislikes. He liked blondes, any blonde that came up and spoke to him, he definitely had a smile for.
He already had
He
a type at that age.
There's
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Cynthia.
he had a type. He had a
Oh yeah.
type. I have a
Yeah.
funny story about him. He received a wish granted
And
through
mom, you're a
Make-A-Wish in.
brunette, so like,
Yeah, no, I was
not
not
his
his
thing.
favorite.
Yeah. You were the
Not his
first
type.
woman that he ever saw, and you're like, no, I'm going with the blonde.
Yeah, wasn't into it. But he had this wish granted through Make-A-Wish, and it was we went to a Broncos game. He loved football and he
Oh,
loved the
okay.
Broncos. And so we went to a Broncos game, and they rolled out the red carpet for us. Like put us
Fantastic.
up in this beautiful hotel, and we had a tour of Mile High Stadium, and just like all of the pieces of it. And then we were kind of walking around the stadium, and all of the cheerleaders were there, and the mascot, and he was not a fan of the mascot at all, like
Oh.
pushing him away, get away, don't. But the cheerleaders were all hovering around him, and he just had a smile that like lit up his whole face. He didn't want anybody else around, didn't want Scott around him, kind of pushing him away. He wanted all the glory of that. So,
That is
he
great.
had a lot of personality, that's for sure.
Yeah, you do when you go. I think that is one of the things you said. He's the toughest person you've ever known, strongest person you've ever known. When people go through trials like that, the character that comes from that, and the personality and charisma. It's nobody wants. You don't want anybody to go through that, but those are, I guess, a few positive things. But anyway, thanks for sharing that with
Thanks
us.
for asking.
If you want to talk more about him, we're happy to hear that. But I do want to get on to.
Oh, we could take the whole podcast. So
Yes,
no,
I'm
let's.
sure. It might be
we're,
worth it.
it is very warms my heart that you
Yeah.
asked if we were able to share some of his personality. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you've told us a little bit about how you got started. Give us a little bit more of a bigger picture of what it was like to stumble. I don't know if you stumbled onto this or if you did it through research planning. How did you settle on potatoes and potato chips, and what was the process of creating the right formula?
Once we figured out that once we reverse engineered a diet that worked for Jackson, I was a chemical engineer undergrad, and so I sort of figured out the physiology, right? The lipid chemistry of why these particular ancestral fats weren't causing inflammatory response, why these particular root vegetables were so necessary and needed for him. We sort of figured out some of that nutrition and some of the lipid chemistry, and then we just started experimenting and making all sorts of things in avocado oil and a bunch of other ancestral fats, coconut oil, butter, lard, tallow, like all of the things that the American Heart Association says don't eat. We started frying everything in those things, tortilla chips and plantains, you name it. And the product that just kept coming out the best were potato chips, and particularly sweet potato chips. And so, the reason I asked earlier, gosh, what did you guys do in the summer if, your parents owned a produce company? Well, just like that, we asked our kids to help us make these chips. And when Megan said, hey, we should start selling these, it's an incredibly laborious process. I mean, we literally did it on a stovetop with a homemade vat. And we'd slice them on a mandolin, and you guys know sweet potatoes, they're pretty fibrous, and they're not the easiest thing to cut. And so slicing those were difficult, and where kids would throw them into the oil individually, and sometimes the oil would splash back and burn us or them. I mean, it was all of the things you all did as children, we asked our kids to do, and sometimes they liked it and sometimes they didn't. And often Megan and I were up 11. We started after they went to bed, and we both had jobs, so we sort of did our jobs, and then 10:30 at night rolls around, like, okay, let's make some chips. And so spend the next couple of hours doing that. So I think the characterization is that we very much stumbled into this. Megan said earlier that we didn't have a sense of the actual industry or the business or how the processes work, the distribution, all that sort of stuff. We just knew how to make them at home and make them taste great. And so many of our friends loved the way they tasted. Like Edwin, your first experience, they're like, my gosh, you should sell these. And so Megan, to her credit, said we should do this. And I was much more skeptical, having had some sense of how difficult that business was. I said, I don't know if we want to do this. This is a brutal, brutal business. It could be really hard. But Megan said, okay, that's all true, but we need to share this story. What we've learned through Jackson and reverse engineered over this past 2.5 years of finding a diet that works for him, which subsequently the folks at the National Institutes of Health told us that it was the sort of lowest inflammation diet you can give a human being, that needed to be shared. And again, to her great credit, she absolutely insisted that we need to start the business simply as a means to share that story. I was considering it just in isolation as a business and being very difficult and probably terribly unsuccessful. That maybe we shouldn't do it, but she said it's not about the business, it's about the story, and that's what ultimately convinced me. Megan, what did I not emphasize or miss there in that?
No, I think, we stumbled on this because we were really just, you mentioned this a few times, looking for how do we control inflammation in what we're feeding him? Like that was our only vehicle to try to control the inflammation. And those were the foods that we were making, right? And so we could tell when we gave him something that created more inflammation and his symptoms would come back. And so it was this very basic sort of cause and effect that we were trying to track. But that was the root of all of it. And I think what we found when we opened up this story and started talking about Jackson and what we'd learned was, people deal with various versions of that, right? So they're trying to manage inflammation for a skin condition or behavioral issue or, something happening with their child or with themselves and trying to manage their health in certain ways. And so, it really kind of struck a chord with people in a way that we didn't expect.
Yeah.
What other foods did you feed Jackson, whether it was fried or not, which fried makes everything perfect, that worked the best for staving off inflammation? Or was it the medium of the oil or the fat in which you made the product?
Megan, you want to
Yeah,
take
let's go.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
was going to
No,
let you answer that.
sure,
Yeah, go ahead.
sure. Yeah,
Scott was our dietitian during much of that.
yeah, I mean, I can tell you, we standardized on effectively what became is known as a ketogenic diet, which is a high fat diet with moderate amounts of protein and then generally low amounts of carbohydrates, irrespective of the source. What we realized quite quickly was that the type of fat, the type of protein, the type of carbohydrate actually mattered greatly. So it wasn't just standard high fat, doesn't matter what the source is. So what we learned in that 2.5 years, and Jackson again was the subject of this experiment, and sometimes it didn't work out and caused lots of gastrointestinal distress and lack of sleep, was that the ancestral fats that are generally more saturated, either monounsaturated like olive oil and avocado oil, or fully saturated like, say, coconut oil, and butter, lard, tallow, those are all sort of more or less monounsaturated and partly saturated, that those were palliative to him, that he really, really liked those. And they're super nutritionally dense. And he did not like the polyunsaturated seed oils, canola, sunflower, safflower, corn oil, soybean oil, etc. He didn't really like those. And so on the oil side, that's the observation. And on the protein side, it generally was sort of red meat and chicken versus, say, fish. He didn't really respond well to fish for reasons that are unclear to us even now. And then lastly, on the carbohydrate side, we say with absolute certainty, refined carbohydrates were the worst possible insult to his neurology, and we would see that really within a handful of hours, where he'd become more spastic, more rigid, and so we.
Can you give me a couple examples?
Sure, like high fructose corn syrup, or
okay, so real,
sugar. Yeah,
Doritos.
Hey.
We shouldn't call it anybody.
Yeah,
I'll
high
edit that
fructose corn
out.
syrup, table sugar, simple syrups, anything that's a refined sugar basically was the worst possible reaction he'd have to that. And so, I said to myself, and Megan said to herself, okay, well, what's on the opposite side of that from a carbohydrate standpoint? And generally root vegetables, beets produce sugar, but yet they have all sorts of vitamins, they have fiber in them. And so he didn't react as well to beets, for instance, when we cooked them and mushed them up, because everything had to be sort of mushed up for Jackson. He still ate by mouth, but it had to be soft. Carrots were fantastic. Of course, it goes without saying, sweet potatoes were fantastic. Sweet potatoes with butter was, his absolute favorite thing in the world.
They're yummy, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're fantastic. But
he had taste buds. There was
Yeah.
nothing wrong with his taste
No,
buds.
not at all. Not one bit. In fact, he would often spit stuff out, if you're like, no, I don't want that. And so it was a great experiment in that way, that he was so receptive, but also reactive to certain things. So we knew immediately, without doing it 5 times, whether he liked
Mhm.
something or not. And so in each of those 3 macronutrient categories, we figured out which were the acceptable versions of those fats, versions of those proteins, versions of those carbohydrates. And it more or less settled on root vegetables. He didn't do great with greens, for instance, lettuce and celery, things like that. They're hard to mush up and make, smooth. Didn't really like those, or it became a little bitter for him. But root vegetables, he loved the taste of them, and they ultimately became vectors for a bunch of other great things we wanted to give him as well. Butter, for instance, right? And so it's, one of the reasons we all love our grandmother's or great grandmother's pie is that crust was generally made with butter and lard, and that's why they tasted so good. Well, same for Jackson, and so once we realized this thing about the fats, and then combined them with some wonderful root vegetables, particularly sweet potatoes, it was the pinnacle of taste and nutrition for him, and that's what I think very many consumers are sort of realizing now when they taste that, as you did, Edwin. It is both nutritious and tastes great. And so for us, the root vegetable is the vector for this healthy ancestral fat that we're using. And for Jackson, those things were incredibly important. And again, to Megan's credit, that's the story. That's the insight that she said is so valuable that we cannot not share that with the rest of the world, and just happen to do so through a company that sells a snack food.
Yeah.
What about honey and maple syrup, things like that? Could he consume those?
Yeah, in smaller quantities for sure. Maple syrup is a little more insulting than honey, but in smaller quantities for sure. Those were real treats. Like Thanksgiving, the sweet potatoes would have the butter and the maple syrup. The Vermont real maple syrup, not sort of refined, sort of manufactured maple syrup. So yes, absolutely, some of those things were treats, but given in moderation.
The Mediterranean diet, of
Nice.
course, has been touted for years as the epitome of the best diet.
Mhm.
But the keto type diet that you've adopted for him is in somewhat conflict. What do you say about that?
I
Yeah.
would only say it's not actually as much in conflict as you think.
Oh, okay.
So
Interesting.
the Mediterranean diet is heavy on fish, vegetables, olive oil, avocado oil, et cetera. Those monounsaturated fats. So the protein types are not heavy and saturated. They have lots of omega fatty acids in them, right? So that's what fish benefit, that we benefit from fish. But the centerpiece of a Mediterranean diet is olive oil, and which is a monounsaturated fat that looks just like avocado oil. They're equivalent from a lipid chemistry standpoint. And so lots of vegetables, which are root vegetables,
Right.
lots of healthy monounsaturated fats, which is avocado oil, and then fish. Jackson wasn't a fan of that, and wouldn't eat as much of it as, say, red meat or chicken, or lamb.
But it didn't affect his health, and he
Right.
could. It wasn't
No.
that wasn't the issue. Yeah.
No, yeah, not
Right.
at all. So, I'd say that those two diets are linked at some level. The ketogenic diet is just an extreme version of the Mediterranean diet, because his pathophysiology was so extreme, to say his resident level of inflammation was so high that we needed to have an extreme diet to ameliorate some of that. But I'd say that
Interesting.
they're not distant cousins, but probably not close cousins, but they are related
Yeah.
in fundamental important ways.
Well, that explains a lot to me because, what I had been reading, I kind of felt they were in conflict, but you've cleared that up, and it makes sense because I know people who have done well, very well health-wise on keto, and then others on the Mediterranean dash type diets, and they seem to be getting the same results, but with different methods. But now that connects it for me. So thanks for that.
The way we've approached this is less dogmatically and less theoretically, and really just what worked for Jackson, right? So that's an unambiguous, undebatable, reality for us. Did it improve his quality of life? If for some reason feeding him banana cream pie 100% of the time made his quality of life better, we would have done that, and I would not have cared about the underlying theory or that attached to that food. You know,
Yeah.
it just so happens that there was and is some underlying theory for monounsaturated and saturated fats and vegetables, and moderate clean protein sources that sort of provide that sort of theoretical foundational basis for the diet. But at the end of the day, Megan and I did not care about scripture. All we cared about was making him happy and making him comfortable. And the diet that we fed him for many, many, many years until he passed away absolutely was that thing that made him comcomfortable. And so we'll leave it to the rest of
steered you
the.
towards what steered you towards the keto diet? Just experimentation, or did you read?
It was mostly experimentation. Yep. What worked and what didn't. Again, one time we gave him a lollipop, he loved it, of course. Within 2 hours, like he was far more rigid and spastic than he was before that. And we're like, that couldn't have been it, could it? And then the next time we did it, like same exact thing. And, it happened 3 times. And that's enough, of a data point for us to be like, okay, that you can't have that. And then we took that observations like that and said, okay, what's the opposite of that thing? Okay, well, let's find the opposite and give him that. Does he react? And so it was very much, Rick, a cause and effect, reverse engineer experiment that, he had to, as I just mentioned, suffer through to get to that bucket of things that we realized these are great things that he loves to eat, as Edwin talked about before, is nutritious, and he'll continue to enjoy. And so that was the optimization.
How many
Well,
different kinds of chips do you have?
Well, we've got multiple flavors of sweet potato that are you're gonna ask me, like, I want to say there's about 18 different now that we have through different formats and flavors. But we've got, several different flavors for sweet potato, spicy jalapeno, and a barbecue and ranch. Ranch is one of our sort of favorites. And then we've also started to launch some white potato chips in avocado oil. Those are new for us. Those are salt and vinegar, barbecue, and a sea salt. And then, we're looking at some more options for a launch this year, which I can't really share, but I can tease a little bit of something we're really excited about that will also have some multiple flavors and is a new product for us as well. So
That is a
we are
snack like
expanding.
that's easy to go and easy to munch.
Yes.
Yeah, different
And
type of snack.
but Jackson, could he eat a potato chip, a crispy,
Yes.
crunchy one? Oh wow,
He could. Yeah, he would.
that's
He
the
would.
beautiful thing about a potato chip.
He would gum that thing and like get it kind of mashed up and then like just sort of get it soft enough in his mouth that he could swallow it.
Fantastic.
So he had some crunch and then he was able to taste it as well. So it was perfect for him.
Yes.
One of the things that we're really excited about is where people are finding us. And you kind of mentioned this in the beginning, Edwin, but so we're in that traditional aisle and that traditional set in the grocery store, but for sort of your purposes as well, and being produce focused, we've been really happy about the opportunities we've had in the produce section.
Yeah.
Because that's a different consumer, and there are a lot of consumers who just want to shop that perimeter and run in, grab their fresh stuff, and leave. And so for us to be able to have some space and line of sight in that produce area has been, we're finding customers, and customers are finding us that normally wouldn't, because they're not shopping in those center aisles.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so, and they're the customers that really care about what's going in their basket, what their shopping preferences are. Like, those are the folks that we want to see and find, because you mentioned this earlier, we've got 3 ingredients, and they're really quality ingredients that come together. Like, the sum of those parts make something really spectacular. And so we're really thrilled to be on your podcast and talking specifically, which is adjacent to produce for us and
Yeah.
for the company.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of my questions I had, of course, was, why the produce? Why did you come to a produce convention? And I think you've explained that. So,
Yeah,
Rick-
that's
Rick-
exactly why.
It's,
Because 2 of the ingredients come from produce. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
the way we think about it is that when a customer goes in and buys a sweet potato or an onion, it's implicit that they're going to do something to that to make it palatable,
Good
right?
point.
They're going to cook it, and they're
Yeah.
likely to add salt or maybe butter or olive oil or avocado oil or something to that thing.
Yeah.
Our thought was, well, let's circumvent that whole process. So you don't have to do that at home. It's the same thing as a sweet potato. It's just we've cooked it a little bit and we've added some salt to it. So it's as close as to the actual thing as you can get, but yet it just replicates what somebody's going to do at home anyway. So why not just give it to them right there?
Yeah.
Exactly. You shorten the experience for them. Like no cleanup, no fuss, no muss. Some of the oils are like, I don't care how good it is. That just there's something that I don't know if it's because of the temperature in which I was using it, whatever I mixed it with, fill in the blank. Do you have any information right off the top of your head?
Yeah, my from a lipid chemistry standpoint, the temperature matters enormously, regardless of the oil, right? Motor oil breaks down eventually, which is why you get your oil changed in a car as a result of pressure and temperature, right? And so when Megan and I started doing this, and this is true till today, we have a process that we optimize for the oil. Most snack food companies optimize for the end price and reverse that to the yield. And then they treat the ingredients however they need to in order to get to that price that they want in the marketplace. We optimize for the process and the ingredients. And so we've always called it sort of low and slow relative to the rest of the industry. And so any oil, regardless of its origin, will start to have off-smelling sort of notes at certain temperatures, again, regardless of its provenance. And so we try to circumvent that by keeping the temperature as low as we can, which reduces our yield and just makes the whole thing less efficient, but nevertheless produces both the nutritional profile and the taste profile, Edwin, that you tasted earlier.
Yeah.
This was most of the feedback we received from consumers for the first few years was like, why does this not taste like all of the other potato chips?
Right.
So that's the reason, because we
That's the
optimize
good thing. Yeah.
for treating the ingredients with kid gloves, right? Because again, you could burn a sweet potato till it's black, and that's a bad thing for you. I assure you that your body is not going to want that sweet potato. Yet it started out as this remarkably nutritious thing. That somewhere along that process, it became a non-nutritious poison, when it's turned into charcoal. But if you heat up a pan, throw the oil in, and wait for it to get to 350 or 400 degrees, that oil is degrading. And then you put in vegetables or anything else, then the temperature will come down. There's no real reason to do that. So we tend to keep our temperatures, well below 350 degrees, on an operating basis. And that's what protects both the integrity, nutritional integrity, as well as the taste of the oil. And that's easy to replicate when you just don't preheat the oil a lot at home.
In addition, oils degrade if you keep them too long in the cupboard, and they will have an odor from that. They'll smell like paint thinner.
That's true.
Or so, and they're bad to use at that point.
Yeah.
And, Teresa, that observation that I think there are generations of Americans who have grown up thinking oils are shelf stable forever, that they're not fragile foods. Like if you kept a sweet potato out on a countertop, eventually that thing molds and degrades. Well, oils do that too, just at a slower pace. But we think that they last forever. That is not true. They are very, very fragile things that should be treated with kid gloves.
Yeah. Well, I think we've exhausted, probably haven't. There's much more to say here. It's very educational, very informative. So thank you. But I do want to hear about your experience on Shark Tank. I know a lot of our listeners are probably wanting to hear that. And tell us about that experience. How did you get on there? And then what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we had a really fun time on Shark Tank. It was a little intimidating, definitely intimidating, in just thinking about pitching. And, when you watch it, they sort of seem out for blood sometimes. And so I was more hesitant, I think, than Scott, because I just didn't want to open myself or this company up to something negative, right? We were trying to do something positive with it. And I just felt like, I don't know, these guys could be really rough. But it sort of landed in our lap in a way that we couldn't say no. the Denver Post, so we live in Colorado, the Denver Post did this article about our son and the company that we'd started in this little tiny town that we live in. It's a little ski town. And so that exposure actually drew the Shark Tank producing team saw that article and reached
Oh,
out to us to ask if we'd be interested in pitching to them. So we didn't go to an open casting call and sort of go this traditional route and
yeah.
whittle through their process that way. We did it probably in a much easier way, which was that they reached out to us. We hemmed and hawed about it a little bit and then decided we would try it out and do it. And so it was this sort of, that was in like February, and we went
Uh,
through this process with them for several months.
What year was
And
that? February of what year?
2017.
Okay.
And
So they couldn't be
so,
too mean to you if they were going to invite you on.
well, yeah, that was the hope.
Well, the
You sort of
panelists
get it
didn't.
out there.
The panelists are the ones that are mean.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
that's
on one of
right.
my favorite
That's
shows
separate.
because they are like, that is the dumbest idea. You're
Yeah,
never going to make any money, and I'm out.
yeah, they could be. Well, the interesting part for us. So it was this process where they would ask us to send answers to questions or videos of ourselves. So they see if you're like TV worthy, if you can present your business well, if you can speak to your business and you're, sort of have half a brain, I suppose. And then, we got invited to go there in June, and that's when we like walked out into the tank and pitched to the panelists, and that conversation was about an hour long. And so I do think when you see them say like, this is a terrible idea, I'm not in it, it's not for me, I'm out, that typically, I would think, based on our experience, is the result of this conversation that's happening. So it looks like a quick cut to that, but I'm not sure that's how it normally
Right, I get it.
happens, because when like, Mark Cuban said to us, like, I'm not really into the food business, margins are terrible, hard to make money, I'm out. It was very much like we could expect him to say that based on the questions he'd asked and the conversation we'd had. So it wasn't abrupt or as mean as it may seem through the cuts that they do, the
Okay,
edits.
right. Hmm.
But we had a great experience. We got a deal. Our shark is still in our business. He's great. He just had an enormous exit from Poppy. Like, he found that company on Shark Tank as well and built
What was
that
it?
business
What?
up. The Poppy beverages
Oh,
that
okay.
are like prebiotic
No, I just
sodas.
didn't hear what you said, but
Oh yeah,
sorry.
Poppy. So he was a big part of the growth of that business and found them on Shark Tank as well. And so he's great. He's been, pretty helpful, and definitely has some clear ideas about the business and how we should run it. And some of them are some things we can do. Some are, maybe nice to haves or future state. But regardless, like for us, I'd say it was a really wonderful experience all around.
Yeah. Well, they love that meanness to create drama in the show,
Hmm.
So
Yes, they
sometimes
were sweet.
I
And
think they spice it up a bit to get that
yes,
drama.
I agree. I mean, it's certainly worth watching on television, right? And
Yeah.
and we had like an extra opportunity with them, where they came to our little town and did this video. So they prefaced our episode with like a behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So some additional content about our son and our story and his story. And it was all a really great experience. And then, we did all of that in June, and our son passed away a few days after they'd been to Crested Butte, our town, to video all of that. And so they came in August. And when you leave the show, they don't commit to anything. They don't say, here's when you're going to be on. They don't tell you if you're even going to be on. You can go through that whole process, get a deal, and still not be on television. And so
Yeah.
it's all sort of, you're on the edge of your seat a
Even
little
if
bit.
you get the deal, you might not be on television.
Yes.
Okay. That
Yeah.
might be the
They
better
still may not
thing.
show
Like,
you.
oh my gosh.
So my son passed away very unexpectedly from this drug trial, and this was not something they had had to deal with ever before. And so I think just that process as well, going through that with them, where they, were very sensitive about what we were going through. They were very sensitive about whether we even wanted to share this at large with, the audience that that show has. Like they were they were just wonderful about letting us dictate what was the right next step and what to do. And we felt like it was the right thing to air this and to share his story and talk about his disease and talk about, what we were doing for him.
Yeah. And at the, in the original airing, or 3 or 5 seconds after it, there was a black screen that said, Jackson Reamer with his, rest in peace. And so that was a nice touch. We had no idea that the executive producers were going to do that. They're genuinely kind and empathetic people.
That's great. That's great.
Oh.
Yeah, we have wonderful things to say.
Yeah. I've been in the television industry for quite a while as well. I have a production company, and I've met with, I know a lot of the people in the business, and it's good to hear you say that, because there's a lot of them that are not that nice to deal with.
Well,
When the red
yeah,
light
we
goes
didn't-
on, then they have the big smile.
Yes. I mean, we didn't luckily I know people have not had some great experiences with that experience, but Scott and I have nothing but great things to say about it.
Yeah, that's good.
Now,
to hear.
this said that you were using coconut oil on there.
Yeah,
At
we
that point?
originally started our business making our chips in coconut oil.
Why did you change?
We for a few different reasons. On just purely economical reasons, that avocado oil outsell the coconut oil chips by, sort of 3 or 4 to 1, and supply chain and just sort of sourcing too. And we are very proud that we use 100% avocado oil, and we have that certification, and it's not cut or mixed with anything else. And so, we were able to source that in a way that was slightly different than what we were able to do on the coconut oil side.
And the potatoes that you use, I read on your website that they are heirloom varieties.
Yeah.
Not modern hybrids.
That's right.
But
That's right. In
heirlooms.
fact, yeah.
Tell us about that. Why?
Yeah. And so these are potatoes that have been around for hundreds of years, these sweet potatoes. And so it's when you go to a sort of a high-end grocery store, say like a Whole Foods or whatever, they say, some just say sweet potatoes, and others say, certain varieties of sweet potatoes. And so that's the other reason we like to be in the produce aisle, because these are a very specific heirloom variety that's been around for hundreds of years, that have been cultivated by growers in the South in the United States for a very, very long time. We just happen to find the ones that work the best. As we said earlier, we're focused on the ingredients first, not the outcome, not the price point. And so if you care only about the price point, you go backwards, you find the least expensive sweet potato variety you possibly can, and maybe you even change it up. We've standardized on a very specific heirloom variety that we think has the highest nutritional density, and also, again, just to reinforce the point, the best taste of any of the sweet potatoes out there. And so, the first couple of years, to be honest, of this effort for Megan and I was spent experimenting with literally 75 different types of different potatoes, all heirloom varieties on the white side. We weren't just using russets or whatever on whites and sweet potatoes. And so, what you see now is the result of a sort of a filtering process of more than 50 different potato types. And we even experimented with some from South America that you can't even get in the United States, trying to figure out if we can get them in the United States. But it was a ton of fun to do that as parents, really, first, and parents and consumers first, rather than sort of business people.
Are these ube that you do, or are they traditional orange colored sweet potatoes?
Oh yeah, they're traditional orange for sure. Yeah.
Have you thought about the purple varieties?
We once made those, Edwin.
Yeah, we did make them once.
We did make those. Those are some of my favorite purple sweet potatoes. They
were a limited run at Whole Foods that we did with our old buyer there. And yeah, they were great. And
They
so
were
it's sort of
awesome.
like,
Oh my
what
God.
is
I was
the
waiting for him to go
opportunity?
like, we did that one time and never again.
Well, so we did discontinue them because the supply chain is not mature enough to have the scale of production that we need, right? So,
Right.
that's a real challenge. We need both contract product as well as open or sort of spot market product because we just need that redundancy. And on the purple sweet potato, it just wasn't available.
Yeah.
So it was a lament of mine. My heart was broken saying that we couldn't make any more of these. But
Is
Yeah.
there one specific geographic area that you pull your sweet potatoes from, or
yeah, the Southeast United
Yes.
States.
Yeah.
okay,
So
North
Mississippi
Carolina?
mostly.
Mississippi.
Mississippi, actually.
Mississippi,
Okay.
wow.
Sometimes Louisiana, but mostly Mississippi, and that's intentional. I mean, I know there are great suppliers in North Carolina too, and I'm not saying anything other than, than the supply chain and the farmers we've been able to work with in Mississippi, family-owned farms, generational family farms are. That there's a lot of intention around who we are extending a partnership with and want to try to partner with. And so we have found some really great partners there.
And to get the right variety, the heirlooms is probably not
Yes.
easy from anywhere. Well, listen, we've kept you for a very, very long time.
Oh,
It's
it's
been
great.
delightful. And
But
we keep you going on and on, as you can tell, but we have to let you go.
what
But before we do that, I want our listeners to know that they probably can find them in a store nearby. If you go to, okay,
Snackjacksons.com. We
yeah,
just
sorry,
changed it.
okay,
And that's a nod to, like, being a snack company instead of just a chip company.
right, Snack Jacksons, plural, or
Yes.
Jackson's possessive, I guess it is. Snackjacksonsfoods.com.
Just snackjacksons.com.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
butchering it.
that's okay.
Well, I want them to know, I want to let them know that they can go there. There's a store locator, and I almost guarantee you if I can find them in my little hometown here, you'll probably find them near you. But if not, and maybe you don't want to go to the store, you can buy them online at Snack
Yes.
Jackson's.
There's a
Snacks?
discount
Yes.
for subscribing to it.
Yes, and
Yes,
you can earn
there
points
is.
and everything. I saw that. It's fantastic. There's their website. And you can watch a little bit of the Shark Tank episode on that website. So visit snackjacksons.com, find your chips, look at their different varieties and packs there. So I wanted to make sure they knew about that and can get to that. Now, Megan and Scott, don't hold Keegan responsible for this. For our listeners, Keegan is Keegan Smith, who handles public relations for the Reamers and Jackson's Chips, and she was very, very helpful in setting this up and getting them booked on the show. But I don't want her to be blamed for what's coming next. But we have something that I did not tell her about, a ritual that all our guests have to go through for being on the podcast, and it's painful. It's very painful.
Quite the hazing you're setting up.
Yeah, your time and energy and information wasn't enough.
Hey.
So here's the deal. Teresa loves puns, and she's always finding these puns about fresh produce and whatever we're talking about. And she brings one to every episode, and we make our guests sit through it and be tortured with this pun. We
So
call
it's
this
It's at the end of the episode.
we call this section homegrown. So here's what happens. Teresa will tell us the pun. It's usually in the form of a question, and she'll ask the question, and we try to guess what the punny answer might be. And then, of course, if we don't guess it, she tells it. And of course, you have to groan. There's no laughing allowed, no matter how funny you think it is. It's not funny. It's groanable. So
Got
anyway.
it. Okay.
Okay. So, Teresa, what is our homegrown today?
Well, both the potato chip and the tortilla chip were members of a debating club. And the potato chip was just so frustrated Because the tortilla chip always won the debates. Why do you think that was?
Okay. All right. So the potato chip and the tortilla chip were in a debating club, and the tortilla chip always won, and that really frustrated the potato chip. Why was that? Rick, you got a guess?
He had the snappiest answer.
I was going to say he had the most pointed answer.
Oh,
Yeah, I was
there
going to
you
go with
That's-
a corner, some kind of corner, like he cornered the
these are all
questions.
good.
Or it could have been like, he's not the chip off the old block.
Yeah,
Well, these are good answers. Very good. But
but
Wait.
you've already had three
Megan
guesses.
and Scott, they
Oh,
didn't
Megan
guess.
guessed. Scott.
Well, yeah, I was going to go something like, he had the corniest answer.
Oh,
Oh, good. Okay, yeah.
I love it.
I like that. Yeah.
Oh, these are good. Yes.
Mm.
Okay.
all
So are
right.
you ready?
We're ready.
Well, the tortilla chip always won because he had a point, which is very close to what Cynthia said.
Maybe he was also crisper in his arguments.
Yeah, that could do it.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Megan and Scott and
Oh, I
Keegan.
love it. That's great.
Keegan, she can't take the blame for this because I didn't warn her. Okay, we're sorry to put you through that, but thank you so much for being on the show with us. This has been very informative, entertaining, inspiring, and heartwarming story. So thank you. Congratulations to you for your success and keeping Jackson's memory alive and doing things for others who need that kind of help. So thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been great talking with all of you. Thank you so
A ton
much.
of fun. Yeah, I really appreciate this.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have
Bye-bye.
a great day. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the Produce Buzzers podcast, brought to you by Produce Buzz, the gathering place for lovers of fresh fruits and veggies. We hope you were entertained a bit and educated a lot about fresh produce. Be sure to join us next time, and please tell your friends to do so as well. Like, share, and comment on our Produce Buzz Facebook page, and check out our website at www.producebuzz.com. There you will find articles about fresh fruits and veggies, how to select, store, and prepare them, as well as lots of interesting facts about all the wonderful bounty the earth provides for us. Until next time, be fruitful and don't forget to veg out.